Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. Hi, I'm Bela and today I will be recording this podcast solo. I'm actually recording this on Paradox, our 2009 Hunter 45 deck salon. This is our podcast about sailing and cruising the East Coast of the United States. Today, I'm going to go over some projects that I've been working on since putting Paradox back into the water this year. And on one of them, I'll tell you, was a major screw up. So Paradox has been in the water for 3 weeks now, and this is actually my third trip to the boat. The boat is in Barrington, Rhode Island, and I live in upstate New York. So it's about a 3.5 hour drive for me to get here. Thus, typically, I usually come down to the boat for 3 or 4 days at a time. Last trip, my wife Elaine was also here. This trip, I'm doing solo. I will say we've been having lots of fog this early season here on Narragansett Bay. It usually burns off by late morning, and we have had two very nice sails so far this season. One of them was with my wife Elaine, and on the other sail, my son, his wife, and their 1-year-old daughter also joined us. You know, it's always wonderful to go sailing with family. We all get along really well, so it's always a pleasure to hang out together on Paradox. You know, I did want to go over some projects I've been working on, and also my one big embarrassing screw up. I will save the screw up for last, though, so you're going to have to wait till the end of the episode to get that one. You know, when we returned to Paradox for our second visit, that was my wife and I were here a week ago, I noticed that the floorboards near the galley sink were damp. This is unusual because Paradox is very dry inside, especially since I fixed the windows. We have these big windows on a deck salon, and in one of my previous episodes, I talked about how I fixed those and resealed them. And ever since then, the bilge is bone dry on this boat. I get no water intrusion at all. So this was really strange. All this kind of damp floorboards around the galley sink. And I remembered that on my first trip to the boat, you know, when I kind of de-winterize things, I run lots of water through the water tanks to get all of the winter antifreeze washed out. So I typically run the sinks and the sink faucets for about an hour or so. So lots of water is going through the system and down through the drain. When I found the damp, wet floorboards, I looked around the sink drains and the supply side, and I saw nothing. I didn't see any leaks. I did pull up some of the surrounding floorboards to get them nice and dry. And on Paradox, this is really quite an easy job, as the floorboards are just held in place with a few screws, so you can lift them right off. And that, of course, makes it easy to get to the underneath the floorboards, where on every sailboat, there's all sorts of stuff under there. There's electrical wires, there's hoses, there's holding tanks, there's water tanks, there's all sorts of stuff under there. So I really appreciate the way they designed that so I can lift those up really easy. I lifted them all up and got everything nice and dried out. And, you know, when we were leaving the boat, I checked the drain connections again, and because I didn't see any new water, there was kind of no new water coming in while we were on the boat for I think 3 days. And but I did notice that we have a double sink on the boat, and that the two sinks are connected to a common drain underneath the sink. And I discovered that these connections were not snug. So I sort of hand tightened them. They have little flanges on them. They're meant to be hand tightened. And I think there's three connections down there, and two of them were sort of, I could make them snugger. So I did. And I hand tightened them, and we left the boat. And when I came back this time, I brought some plumber's putty with me and some other things, so if I had to redo those seals, that I could. And, uh, you know, when I So I was thinking, well, gee, maybe it was the drains because that's the only thing I could think of. And so when I arrived to the boat this time, what I did was I kept the sink drain seacock closed and I filled the sink and the drain lines with water, filled them right to the top. And I waited about an hour. And so this now means, the sink is full of water, all the drains down to, and the piping and the connections down through to the through hull are all full of water and not a drop of water. So I think that my tightening up those connections underneath the sink solved my leaking problem. So we'll see. I've been here 2.5 days now, and I haven't noticed any water or dampness around the sink or anyplace else. And I will say that when I leave the boat, I close all of my through hull seacocks. And it's just part of the many standard things that I do when I leave the boat. I actually have a written checklist that I keep on the navigation table, and I go over it every time that I leave the boat. And I'll tell you, I came up with this written checklist because 2 years ago, when I was driving home from being on the boat for a while, I remembered that I left a forward hatch open. So, lesson learned, I made a checklist. And it's an evolving checklist because I often think of things and add it and sort of modify it. And the checklist is also nice because when my son uses the boat, he doesn't use it as much as I do. It's a helpful tool for him as well. So that's a good thing to have. If you don't have those types of things, maybe you don't need them. But for me, it's I find it to be very, very helpful. So let's see. Oh, another project that we did besides fixing this leak is replacing the deck light. So I have a deck light that's about halfway up the mast. Um, and I also wanted to run a spinnaker halyard. So in order to do that, you got to go up the mast. So up the mast we went. And what I mean by we is I hoisted my son up the mast. One of the great benefits of having children who love the outdoors and do a bit of rock climbing is that they don't mind going up the mast. And this, I will say, is our first excursion up the mast. This deck light has been burned out ever since we got the boat. Well, I think it's burned out. I didn't know if it was burned out or if it was an electrical problem. Um, but there's a deck light about halfway up the mast, and it sort of illuminates the deck. It's very helpful at night if you're out sailing or if you're even at the dock and you need to go forward to check on something or whatever. It gives you great light. So I wanted to get that light working. So to get Andy up the mast, Andy, my son, here's what we did. He put on his climbing harness. So he's a rock climber, or an indoor gym rock climber, I should say. We put on his climbing harness as a backup. And then I also have a very nice bosun's chair that came with the boat. And it's got several really nice big pockets, and it's, much more comfortable for sitting in for a long period of time than hanging by a climbing harness. So we put that bosun's chair on Andy as well as sort of the primary. And then what we did is we tied the jib halyard to the bosun's chair, and we used that as the primary lifting line. And I tied the topping lift that I have as sort of the backup. And we took the jib halyard and we hooked that up to an electric winch I have on the cabin top in the cockpit. And then I hooked the topping lift up to a manual winch that I have in the cabin top that's accessible from the cockpit. And both of these go through line stoppers. So you can keep the line stopper closed, which is basically a one-way valve for a line. You can pull the line in one direction, but it can't go in the other direction. So you can pull them up, but it won't let it go down unless you release this stopper. So we had them all set, and I will say that having that jib halyard hooked up to the electric winch uh, made it really nice to sort of lift him up. that was just pushed a button and zip, he went up. And on the other winch, I just took in the slack manually. So that really made that easy. So hoisted him right up to the top of the mast. And he looked over, the electrical connections up there, the light bulbs, all the fittings, the pins, the cotter pins, the stays, etc. And we sort of inspected the mast from top to bottom. Now, neither one of us is a professional rigger, uh, but you can sort of look for gross things that are bad, and sometimes you'll see things that you say, "Oh my gosh, this thing's halfway out because a cotter pin fell out or something," and you can kind of take care of those things. But everything looked really good. Um, and on this boat, there's a place for a spinnaker halyard, and it wasn't installed on the boat when we got it, but it did have a messenger line already threaded through the mast. So I had bought a line to serve as a halyard, and we tied that new line to the end of the messenger line and pulled this new spinnaker halyard up through the mast. And this went nice and smooth. We had no hang-ups. It didn't jam any place inside the mast because that's sort of what you worry about, and then you're stuck. But all that went very nice and smooth. So that was good. So we got a spinnaker halyard installed onto the mast, and it also serves as sort of an extra line for lifting up an extra halyard for lifting up a dinghy or something like that. Because I don't have a spinnaker, but even for hoisting Andy up, I had to use my jib halyard and my topping lift. So I had to disconnect stuff in order to lift anything up. But in this case, with this spare, I call it a spinnaker halyard, it'll just be there at the side of the mast, and we can use it for lifting all sorts of things. And as I mentioned before, uh, Paradox has a deck light. It's about halfway up the mast, sits just below the radar. And, its a purpose is to light up the deck at night, and it's really good. It's never really worked. And I didn't know if it was a wiring problem or if the light bulb was burned out. So when Andy went up the mast, he took with him a voltage meter, one of the many pockets on that nice bosun's chair we have. And he did some measurements up there. And we determined that the light bulb was burned out. So he pulled the light bulb out. I ordered a new one. And next time Andy is here at the boat, I'll send him back up to install the new bulb. And hopefully we'll have a working deck light, because we checked all the electrical connections and we did have electricity. We had 12 volts up there at the connections in the mast. So that was really good. So now on to my big screw up, what you all been waiting for. Boy, this is embarrassing. So, when I purchased Paradox, it came with 25 feet of anchor chain. And I felt that this was not sufficient for my needs. 25 feet seemed really kind of short to me. I mean, it had 200 feet of road, of nylon line road, but the chain wasn't 25 feet. I thought was, for me, kind of short. If you're just going out for lunch, which is, I think, how the former owner used the boat, I don't think they did any overnight anchorages. 25 feet's probably fine. I wanted a little bit more. So I wanted to get at least 100 feet of chain, and I'll attach that to the 200 feet of the nylon anchor road that's already there. And I thought that would work for me. So Paradox has a Lumar V2 anchor windlass, and the Gypsy which is a part of the windlass, and that's the part the chain winds around. And it's the part that actually, as it spins, it raises and lowers the anchor chain. And there's a number or a code that's stamped onto the Gypsy, which tells you what size chain it's designed for. And the code on our Lumar V2 anchor windlass is 002. So I was able to find that. And the chain needs to be matched to the Gypsy, because if it doesn't, the chain will either skip uh, or it could possibly jam particularly when it's under tension. So you got to get the right size chain for the right size Gypsy. So it's important to get the size properly. So armed with the 002 code for the Lumar V2 Gypsy, last summer, I got on the internet and I looked at the Lumar website and I looked at other sources. And after having way overthought this and spending probably, a good 10 hours, I convinced myself that a 3/8 G4 anchor chain was the proper size. It turns out chain comes in all sorts of different sizes. And what's made for windlasses is typically a G4, and that's some sort of specification for dimensions. And the 3/8 is the size. So there's, half inch, there's quarter inch, there's 5/16, G4 for all of those. And that's a certain set of dimensions that are standardized. So I convinced myself it needs a 3/8 G4. Hint number one that I was screwing up was that Paradox came with 25 feet of 5/16 G4, not 3/8 G4. But lo and behold, I convinced myself, well, maybe, the boat was bought from a dealer and they just put the, cheapest chain they could on there. Who knows how I convinced myself, but I did. Uh, and so that was hint number one. But I will say in my defense, the Lumar site was very confusing. They had a table there for, a V2 windlass with 002 code, and it said it recommends a 10 millimeter DIN 766 chain. That's a metric standard for anchor chain, or a 3/8 Campbell S4. Again, it's a specification. Uh, and I'm saying, oh, well, that's kind of weird. And I couldn't find that kind of chain. I couldn't find any 10 millimeter chain. I couldn't find any 3/8 Campbell S4. And it didn't mention 5/16. So I'm thinking, so what do I do now? So I contacted a few anchor chain suppliers and they said 3/8 G4, which is what I ended up buying, should work as it is close to 10 millimeter DIN 766, and it's also very close to 3/8 Campbell S4. Key word here being should. Well, I ordered 100 feet of ACO, which is a brand, ACCO, 3/8 galvanized, hot dip galvanized G4 anchor chain. I did that late last summer. I installed it last fall, just before the end of the season. It looked a bit loose on there when I, wrapped it around the gypsy. And I said, suspicion hint number two. That's probably not proper, not the proper size. But it went up and down at the dock okay. I sort of dumped it down at the marina here and it went up and down and, it looked good. But I must confess, I sort of had a feeling that I did not buy the proper size anchor chain. I just had that sort of sinking feeling. I didn't think too much about it over the winter. I did sort of get back on websites and try to confirm or unconfirm that if I bought the proper size or not. But again, I got mixed data. I just might probably not looking at the right places, I guess. But I will say that last fall, I did go out once and anchor. I think we went out for lunch and we dropped anchor for lunch. And the anchor went down fine with the 3/8 chain, so that was good. And when I was retrieving it, that's when the anchor chain's a bit under more load. And sure enough, it skipped and it jammed a little bit, and I just reversed it in the other direction and unjammed. So no big deal. But another sinking feeling. It shouldn't be skipping because it's not like the boat's been used a lot by the previous owner. I'm just the second owner of the boat, so it's not like the gypsy is worn out. Sometimes the proper size chain will skip because the gypsy is worn out, which happens over time if you anchor a lot and use it a lot. But that's certainly not the case here. So sinking feeling again. Boy, I don't think I got the right chain. But like I said, I went home. I sort of lamented over it and over the winter, and so be it. So last week, last time I was here, I should say, yeah, it was last week. We went out with the family and dropped the hook, dropped the anchor for a little bit of lunch, and went down fine. And Andy, my son, looked at the chain while it was going up and going down, I should say. He said, "Yeah, it looks all right." Went down nice and smooth. And we're bringing it up. We're done with lunch. We're retrieving the anchor. Again, it's under a little bit of tension. And sure enough, skips a tooth and it jams. Reversed it, unjammed nice and easy, and was able to keep retrieving it, but clearly under tension, and not a lot of tension, because you're not supposed to pull the boat with the anchor windlass. You're supposed to, maneuver the boat with the engine, and just, keep the not use not use the windlass for towing your boat around. But regardless, clearly the anchor chain is under tension when you're bringing it in, and like I said, it skipped and jammed again. So sure enough, I now got convinced that, okay, I bought the wrong size chain. And Andy had a great idea. He said, "Hey, Dad, maybe it's cheaper to get a new Gypsy that's sized for 3/8 chain than it is to buy a new chain." So when I got home from that trip, I looked into it. And this is when I was able to clearly see that they only made Gypsies for my windlass in a 1/4 inch and 5/16 inch chain sizes. They do not make a 3/8 chain size Gypsy for my winch. So clearly I need 5/16 inch chain because that's the Gypsy that's on it. That's the 002 code. When I was looking for replacement Gypsies, this is where I got clear data and information. Um, so I said, all right, I bit the bullet. I clearly purchased the wrong size chain. So last week I ordered 5/16 G4 chain. I ordered it from Defender, which is in Connecticut, and it's sort of a little bit out of the way to go there on the way to the boat. But I ordered it and I picked it up there because the chain weighs like 100 pounds. So I went to pick it up on the way to the boat this trip, and I installed it yesterday, um, and works great. It clearly fits properly when you look at it, particularly compared to the 3/8 chain. You can see it fits the Gypsy like it should. So uh, hopefully this is probably solved now. So lesson learned, right? And I'll tell you, I do have a tendency to overthink things. I overthought this one starting last summer for sure, and it's not unusual for me to overthink things. And most of the time, my original hunch is right, and the overthinking takes me down some rabbit hole that I end up regretting. So there it is, a big screw up. And I will say, if any of you need 100 feet of 3/8 G4 anchor chain, hot dip galvanized, ACO brand, it's really good stuff. I got 100 feet for you at a really good price. You got to come pick it up because 100 feet of the 3/8 weighs about 150 pounds. And I will say, I used a pretty clever way of getting it on and off the boat. So I'm not a bodybuilder. I can't lift 150 pounds. So I had 3 5-gallon buckets, and I put a third of the chain in one bucket, a third of the chain in another bucket, and a third of the chain in the third bucket. Now, all the buckets are still tied together with chain, and I could move the buckets, a couple feet at a time down the side decks, and I was able to lift them off the boat and get them up to the car. So when you're moving heavy stuff, divide and conquer, and that worked really well for me. But so if you need any anchor chain, give me a contact me, and I'll give you a really good deal on it. So let me wrap this one up, I guess. Yeah, Mike's busy. He's got a real busy time teaching right now over in Germany, so I just thought I'd get this episode out by myself. I hope you found this episode interesting and thought-provoking, and for me, a little embarrassing, but hey, so be it. If you have any questions about what I talked about, you can get in touch with us. The email is sailingtheeast, all one word, sailingtheeast @gmail.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that follow button on your podcasting application. It really helps us. The more subscribers we get, the sort of higher up in the rankings it goes, and it's easier for other people to find us. Or if you know of someone that would be a good guest for the show, let me know. I'd love to interview them and get them on the show. So until next time, signing off from Paradox here on Narragansett Bay. See you soon. Thank you for listening.